In 1997, Radiohead was riding high on a wave of two successful albums. Were they slightly better versions of what Oasis was doing with unimaginative Britpop? Yeah, sure, but the money was good. Clearly, it was time to dip back into the well and clone the Beatles once again. Instead, Radiohead tacked into the driving headwinds of a new version of prog rock for the 21st century. "That's great," said the execs at Capitol Records. "We're so glad you're expanding yourselves artistically." Then they sighed, revised sales estimates from 2 million to 500,000, and canceled the renovations on their homes. Boy, were they wrong. While the electronic and eclectic OK Computer may have been a little harder to put on the radio, the fans loved it. Over time, this visionary record has amassed multiple platinum album certification and unending praise from music critics. Your hosts were distracted by life in the late 90s, so we decided to revisit those halcyon days of frosted tips, IMF protests, and not talking about Fight Club. Pour yourself a solo cup of cheap wine and join us for episode 73 of Toasting the Classics. OK Computer. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it and decide if it's still a classic while we're drinking something that has been inspired by the classic. My name is Dave McArthur.
And my name is Clint Lanier.
And we are here to talk about something that was a free choice. We could have chosen anything. We could have chosen a mineral. We could have chosen a vegetable, an animal, anything.
We should try a vegetable sometime. That would be fun.
We probably should. We should rutabaga. I think we'll
yeah,
make
there you go.
Scintillating podcast.
That's a classic.
But this time, because of my lack of imagination, I went with an album, which is OK Computer, the 1997 third studio album from Radiohead. I had this album. I loved Radiohead back in the day, and so I chose it. It's my choice. It's going to be up to Clint. I don't know how much background Clint has listening to Radiohead / OK Computer, but we're going to find out today whether it's going to survive the Toasting the Classics gauntlet. What do you think? What do we start out with?
Well, let's get a couple of things out of the way real quick. So this was released in 1997.
1997.
How old were you in 1997?
I was 20 years old.
Okay.
Actually, it would have been before my birthday, so I was 19 when this album came out.
I was 23, 24, something like that. So you were in college.
Correct.
This came out. I was just finishing up, going out into the workplace and trying to start a real job, a real life, and all that other stuff.
If I'm not mistaken, from what I've learned of the history of Clint Lanier by doing this podcast, this is the summer where you worked at the mall at the record store and had to listen to Savage Garden.
Yes.
Because as part of the research for this, I looked up a list of other albums that came up in 1997, and I saw Savage Garden on there, and I was like, oh, yes, infamously, Clint was listening to Savage Garden.
Well, luckily, my wife worked at the record store right across.
Oh, it was your wife that worked at the record store. That's right.
I worked in the mall at like a jewelry store, and she was working across the way at the record store. So this is summer of 1997.
Summer of 1997.
Right?
The summer of 1997. I had finished my second year of college, and I took a road trip across the entire United States with my friends. We did. I mean, it was like a month-long camping road trip. We went out to Los Angeles, and I saw the whole country for the first time in my life. Really, I also worked as a mover for the first part of the summer. For several months, I worked in a warehouse, and then I went on these moving jobs. It was that summer, that year really sticks in my head. It was a distinctive one. It was kind of a formative year for me in a lot of ways. And then later in 97, I broke up with my first college girlfriend. And then I ended up making just all new friends in college because I finally didn't have a girlfriend.
So it was transformative.
It was transformative. Yeah, it was a big year for me.
So this came out June of 97. And I'm looking here, you've got...
So I've got a little list that I wrote down of albums if we want to talk about that.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
So like I said, I was writing down some things that I don't want to offend you, but I was writing down some things that were a little cheesy that were, I think, representing sort of the Brit pop kind of old guard of things that were out, like Savage Garden, no offense.
Okay.
Aqua, if you remember Aqua, the Barbie girl song.
Yes, Aqua.
Spice World came out in 1997.
Oh.
Then we've got some other things that are a little more interesting, right? There's some of this alternative. So Blink 182, I think, put out their first album that year, and that's the start of something big, kind of a new second wave of punk or emo or something like that. You've got Belle and Sebastian put out one of their first albums, and and Yola Tango also, which is creating the indie wave that came on for the next 10 years. And you've got The Prodigy and Chemical Brothers sort of starting out British electronic in a different kind of way. And then you've also got Jay-Z,
yeah.
Puff Daddy, and Notorious B.I.G. putting out big albums, which again
Yeah.
is creating this new thing that was going to last for a while. A second wave after Dr. Dre and stuff that we've covered before. So I think it was kind of a big year in music.
There's a lot of stuff coming out. Creed's first album, My Own Prison, came out.
Okay.
Creed was it was big on the radio. Say what you will
it was
about
big
it.
on the radio. But I have to say,
everywhere.
Sometimes I fall hook, line, and sinker for whatever the big thing is that's on the radio. But in this case, I did think Creed sucked at the time.
Yeah,
I definitely
not so
was
much.
not a fan.
Sugar Ray.
Oh, really? That was 97? I guess
yeah.
that sounds about right. Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. You got Blues Traveler, Limp Bizkit, Cherry Poppin' Daddies. Remember them? Do you remember like the whole swing era?
Have you seen the documentary about the collapse of Woodstock 99?
No.
It's actually really interesting, and it's there was a moment in things then where I remember I was interested in going to that first Woodstock renewal that happened in like 1995 or something. But I saw the lineup. I remember seeing the lineup for Woodstock 99, and I saw Korn and Limp Bizkit. And I was like, this is not Woodstock type of people. This is people that are going to set everything on fire. And that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
And I was not wise. I was a 21-year-old, and I was not a wise person, but I was like, man, that's stupid to put those people together. Like those are the fans of those bands are
that's just a bad idea.
Fire.
Well, I guess basically my answer is Radiohead was not on my radar.
Oh, okay.
Pardon the pun. And or on my radio. They were not something that I really listened to. I mean, I remember Creep was huge, got a lot of airplay. I think like in the 90s, I was still stuck in, especially like 97, I was still stuck playing Alice in Chains and Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And I mean, that was still sort of the kind of music I was listening to. I mean, Cobain had passed by then, but they had 3 albums out within a year. I was listening to them quite a bit. I don't know. I wasn't a big Radiohead fan.
I'm looking at this list of albums, and there's a couple I didn't mention, like Whatever and Ever Amen by Ben Folds 5. I listened to that all the time that year. I love that album. This is probably not something I should admit, but Sarah McLachlan's second big album, Surfacing, was one of my favorites that year. It might have been because I was in a bad mood, because like I said, I broke up with a girl, so I might have been wallowing a bit. Yeah, but I didn't actually pick this one up until later, because I had Pablo Honey. I loved Creep. And I actually had the Bends because I'm actually having trouble remembering which songs are on that, but it's a couple of great songs that I really like. High and Dry, Satellite, there's something. Sorry, Black Star, and then there's another one that's really good that's on there. That's a really good album, and I had that. But this one, I think for some reason I didn't quite buy right away. There was a Bjork album that came out this year.
Yeah,
and Bjork, Homogenic. And I used to buy Bjork's albums right away when they would come out. And every single time she released an album, I'd listen to it and I'd say, "Oh, this sucks." and then I'd listen to it a second time and I'd be like, "Well, maybe it doesn't suck that much." Then I'd listen to it a third, fourth, fifth, and I'd start to love them. And that's what this album was. And for some reason, I had this and didn't quite give it enough plays to get into it until years later. Like I was in law school when I was listening to this one over and over.
I'll tell you what came out in 97.
Okay.
Chumbawamba Tub Thumper.
Wow, that was 97.
Just the worst song ever written. I mean, that's like that song is like musical herpes.
I
you
thought
just
that
cannot
was
you cannot get rid of that. As a matter of fact,
yeah,
me just saying it now just infected all of our listeners if you've heard that song. And what's wrong with that song is you can't. It's just the first line. I get knocked down, I get up again. You're never gonna, and that's all you say. And you never get past that part. That's why it's so bad. It's just
there was something that went wrong with the radio about this time, and I think the radio stations became consolidated under some large national.
Oh yeah, maybe.
I think I've read about it before, and I'm waxing kind of stupid right now because I can't remember the specifics of it. But there were some, I think Clear Channel or something like that.
Clear Channel, yeah. I think
there were some companies
bought everybody there was, yeah.
They consolidated it so that if you drove across the country like I did in the summer of 97, you were hearing the same songs everywhere. There was no, we're in El Paso, so they're playing the music that people like in El Paso this summer. It was like the same stuff everywhere you went.
And I think that might be one of the reasons that I didn't. So this album didn't get a lot of airplay. Matter of fact, it was
no, not really.
No. Unless it got a lot of airplay on
We
the
still had an alternative rock
I was
station
gonna
in
say,
I think I
yeah,
was familiar with Karma Police. I definitely knew
on
that song.
on alternative rock or on like if it was a movie, it'd be like the art house theater version of that, right?
Right, right.
So if you had those
What
kind of
about your, didn't you
stations,
guys have a great college radio station,
we had
Corning MSU?
KRUX, but Crux never played. I mean, they played really off the wall stuff. I mean, they played stuff
Oh,
you just never heard of. A lot of local bands, Liquid
okay.
Cheese and stuff like that. But um, yeah, there was
Is
not a
Liquid
lot
Cheese
of
a form of music I don't know about, or is that a band that was
that's
from
a local
here?
band. It's a local
Okay,
ska
all
band
right,
that was
got
actually
it.
pretty big in our area. There was a great band here in our area called Troy's Bucket. Does that name mean anything to you?
No, no, I'm
Okay,
sorry. I'm
Troy's
trying to think of
Bucket.
what the. So we had Jimmy's Chicken Shack was big around the DC
Uh-huh.
area at this time, and I'm trying to think of what the other. There were some bands that I knew were not national bands, but they were popular in the area. And then occasionally we'd actually have something that went national, but not that frequently.
Nothing.
Weirdly
Well,
enough.
Troy's Bucket, just the name of it. It's
Uh-huh.
named after a line in the Goonies when they're down in
Oh
the they're
yeah,
down
yeah,
in the
yeah,
well.
yeah.
He's
That's
like,
all that
this is
ends when
our
you go
time,
up in Troy's
Troy's
bucket.
Bucket. Yeah, so I love that.
That's a
What a
great name. I never.
what a great name, right? I mean,
That
it's
is a
such an
great name. I
obscure
didn't make that
reference,
connection. I like that.
but it was just never a thing for me. I mean, I heard Creep on the radio. That was obviously early '90s, like
Yeah,
'93 or something.
that was broad radio play.
Right. Don't Leave Me High, like you said. This one I never really was, I never just got exposure to it. And,
Okay.
I was kind of busy. I was trying to finish up college and I was married and I was sort of in my own little world. And I was really focused on just getting the heck out of college, which I did
Well,
eventually.
so not to get too biographical about you, but how
Mhm.
old were you when you got married? You must have been pretty
I
young.
was 22. Yeah, I was 22
Okay,
when I
yeah.
got married.
Yeah. I can say it now, 30 years later, but I probably wouldn't have put money on that.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
everybody lost their bet. Yeah, everybody lost their bet.
one of my friends did the same thing. He got married when they were 20, 21, and they're still together. They have
Yeah,
one of the most solid marriages I've seen. It
20,
wasn't
26 years later, she's still putting up with me. When you're young and single with nothing else going on, or even if you're in college, you're more in tune to what's going on in culture, just kind of in the atmosphere and the environment. But when you're like, I was married, so I wasn't going out. We're trying to get through college. Both of us are struggling to get through college. And I was just in college mode, get through the classes and stuff like that. So I really didn't have, I mean, there was like, it's a period when like 2 years when we were broke. And once that was done, then, oh, there's a life outside of this. And this sort of came out when I was in that dark zone. I wasn't going on vacations. I wasn't buying it. I was just plodding through
nose to the
school and stuff.
grindstone, one
Yeah,
foot in
totally.
front of the other.
So that's sort of when this came out. Now, so I downloaded this, listened to it many times. I think I've probably you came up with this what 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
I probably
Oh,
listened to this.
so you download you when you say download, you mean recently downloaded it
Yeah,
just
yeah,
now.
that was the
Okay.
first. I had never heard this album um,
Oh.
at
Oh,
all.
I'm
And
like I'm kind of
yeah,
jealous.
and the first time I heard it, I was like, ugh. Because I got to be
Okay.
honest with you, I hate Oasis. I have heard Oasis.
I think one of the big things about this album is what a departure it is from
Yes,
Oasis.
yeah,
Like
but
it's
but
not
immediately,
Oasis.
immediately, I was thinking the whiny British garbage
Right.
sound from Liverpool.
Right.
And I know a lot of people liked Oasis and will challenge me to a fist fight for that. Um,
Oasis is okay, but Oasis. So I really enjoyed Oasis at the time. I remember hearing Wonderwall, and I was like, what a great little song." But that was
meh,
my feeling. It was a little song. It was
yeah,
just doing the same crap
but
people had
some
always
people saw
done.
it as a movement or something. I just couldn't get it.
Yeah.
And so I heard this, and the first time, and obviously I did the research because we do a lot of research, ladies and gentlemen,
Oh
for this
yes.
show. Yes, I
Exhaustive.
mean like
Exhaustive.
5 or 10 minutes worth, and
Well, we have
um,
teams. We have teams of people in the back room here going
absolutely
over
feeding us
all
stuff
the.
as we
Right.
speak. As a matter of fact, somebody's in my ears telling me what to say right now.
I
Quit
really
saying
should
it.
give credit to Agnes back there in the research room if I ever say anything funny because she
Good
usually
old,
writes
good old Agnes.
my best
For
lines. Yeah.
95, she's spry. So, but after listening to it, okay, the first time I listened to it, I was like, "What is this dribble?" Second time, I was like, this," and now I'm pretty sold on it. I don't want to give too
Okay.
much away from the ending, but
So
it
you're having the
it
experience I had with my Bjork albums. You like heard it the first time, you were like, "What the hell? What is this?" You know?
yeah, right, yeah. What is this crap? And I've listened to it many times. I read about it, which almost made it worse. Almost turned me off actually, because it's a bit precocious
A
and
little bit. a little
And
bit.
when you read about, oh, well, this is what we were thinking when we came up with this song and blah blah blah, it doesn't help your cause.
Yeah.
But just listening to it though, it really has turned me around on
So I think that musicians
it.
oftentimes, and especially popular musicians, there's a genius to them, right? I mean,
Hmm.
obviously they can do a thing that most people can't do and create music in a way that a lot of people can't do. But when you listen to their explanations for what they
Hmm.
thought while they were doing it,
Hmm.
man, most of the time it ruins the music for you.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you just do the music boy? Like you're really not great at talking
Right.
and thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Sing and dance, entertain us. Shut up.
yeah, just sing and dance and entertain me, and don't tell me, what your
Yeah.
political beliefs are behind this music, which is, obviously an elitist jerk thing of me to say, but it's, like it's kind of true. Like I remember hearing Bono talk about something, and I was like, man, I had more respect for the music before I heard what your rationale was for it. But
Yeah.
they're just inspired people, I think. That's not really has nothing to do with
Maybe. Yeah.
the conscious thoughts they have that
Right.
creates the music.
There's a whole postmodern, post-structuralist take on that. Like, does it really matter what the author says? Because you're the one receiving it. I think it was Roland Barthes who said the author is dead, or maybe it was Foucault. One of them,
Okay.
said that the author is dead. Like the author doesn't matter.
These Foucaults and Derridas and Roland Barthes. That's all
Yeah.
you. You're in the ivory tower. I don't know anything about that.
Well, you knew the names. I'm impressed
Did
there.
those
But
guys play for the Knicks last year? I don't know. I don't know who they are.
right, right. But I mean, the point is that it doesn't matter what they say. It just matters what you get out of it.
I suppose that's true.
But it's nice to know. I mean, if you see a Jackson Pollock and painting and it's a bunch of splashes and drips and stuff on a canvas, but there's a name beside it. Like I remember one that was particularly splashy and drippy, and it's called Galaxy. And it's like, oh, okay, I can see it now. And
Right.
without that name, there's like splashy and drippy. But Galaxy, okay, it's the movement of the stars and everything else. And it was like a long exposure photograph, when you see the stars move and there's streaks instead of just a sable star.
I'm sure there's got to be in the theory of the arts. There's got to be a
Mm.
whole discussion about how much the artist, if you hear what, like you said, they put a title on a work and that shapes the work for you. Or should
Right.
you have experienced the thing before you saw the title, or before you even heard the artist's name or saw their
Right.
face or what they looked like or anything? Should you just
Right.
And it's almost like you have to make this artistic choice for yourself before you engage
Right.
with the work. How am I going to do this? Because it's going to frame everything about it.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah.
if you went online just now, so what I did today is I hadn't listened to the album in a couple of years.
Mhm.
So I pulled up, the basics about the album, and I read through the first, couple hundred words, and I said, all right, now I'm just going to go listen to the album again.
Mhm.
Because I thought about reading the whole article and informing
Mhm.
my listening. And I said, no, I'm going to do it a little colder than that. So I
Mhm.
went and listened to it. And that's a choice that I'm making. It's almost like I'm
Right.
the artist in a
Yeah.
way. Because I think, because
Well,
I should say,
yes.
my
Yes.
definition of art is choices that you make,
Hmm.
right? Like the things that a person does when they create art that are choices and not just necessities from the art
Mhm.
form are what is art, right? If
Yeah.
I build a bridge, I have to make sure the bridge doesn't collapse. I have to make sure people can get across the river.
Right.
Everything else I do is art. Like
That's true.
what kind of trimming I put on it and what materials I use, and do I go with one kind of, and so I think you're as a person that's taking the art in, you do the same thing. You make choices about how am I going to take this in? Where am I going to sit while I listen to it? What do I think of these
And
people before I
not to get too esoteric, but I think you also brought up an important point about the lens that you bring into something,
uh-huh.
that you
Yeah,
look at it through, because your expectations color how you receive something,
absolutely.
right? There's a
Absolutely.
there's a book by Don DeLillo called White Noise, which I think is being made into a movie.
It's a show. It's a show now, I
Oh, it's
think.
a
I think
show,
it's
right?
either a movie or a
And
Netflix show.
and one of the they and in the book he talks about, he takes a friend of his is visiting, and so he takes his friend to go see the most photographed barn in like the world. And
Okay.
it's the most photographed barn because it's the stereotypical barn, like in New England. Like
Right.
this looks like a barn. If you go to a barn, this is what a barn is supposed to look like. And so he's walking around as his friend is like looking at the barn and stuff, and he's noticing people taking pictures of the most photographed barn in the world. And then he's noticing people taking pictures of people taking pictures of the most photographed barn in the world, right? And
Right.
it dawns on him that none of them are seeing the barn. they're seeing the most photographed barn in the world because
Right.
this is what they've heard of. They've heard of the barn, and it
Right.
goes back to
Right.
like, this theory that you can't, if you've never seen, like, you can't see the Grand Canyon if you've ever heard about the Grand Canyon because
Right.
all you've ever heard builds up the Grand Canyon so much, and you get there and you're like, oh, is this all there is?
Yeah.
So I went
Absolutely.
into I went into this album thinking, oh, this is a bunch of whiny British pop drivel. This is, a la Oasis type of thing. It's gonna be whiny, yada yada yada.
Right.
And I listened to it with that frame of reference, and I was impressed that it wasn't that. Like, I found that it wasn't that.
Right.
And I had never heard that this was the best album in the world. And I mean, there's all these accolades that we can talk about in a bit, but
Right.
that I had never heard any of those accolades. I was like, really? This is supposed to speak to my generation? I hadn't heard that before. Had I heard all that stuff, I think it would have I would have been let down, right? Because I don't think this does speak for the Gen Xers out there. I think, to me,
So,
my album is Smells Like Teen Spirit, and it
well,
always will,
not
or
to get into it,
Nevermind rather.
not
But
to get into it too early, but I think it's rather like Nevermind, is that
mhm.
did it speak to the generation of 1991? I'm not sure it did. It spoke to those of us who were a little younger. It was like, because it represented what was coming. And I think this
Mm,
album, I was almost, I did like this, but I think it represented what was coming more than it did. I think it was more representing of how people felt in 2002, 2003
mm.
than of 97, because it was ahead of its time, I think.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Well, I mean, folks, the reason we're saying this is because this is one of the accolades it gets, is that this speaks for Gen X. This is the Generation X's anthem album, and that it's anti-commercialism, and it talks about materialism. It's kind of like Fight Club in that. Like, if you ever
Yeah.
watched the movie or read the book
Yeah, it's
Fight
of a
Club, it's all
time.
about
Yeah, it's of a time with
consumerism,
Fight
right?
Club. I agree.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like you look around and there's a price tag attached to everything that you own, right? And
There's even some express references to the IMF and things like that in
right.
this
Yeah, exactly.
album.
And
And I
so
think it's sort
it
of
recognizes
a
that.
parcel with those things where I remember feeling, and I don't know whether this is true, but I remember feeling at the end of the 90s like history was over, and
Yeah,
we were just in this like terminal phase of like everything was going to be consumerism right now.
yeah,
Nobody really had any
right,
serious
right.
problems, and everybody
Yeah,
just kind of had some angst about that, which is
yeah.
stupid.
Well, angst and anger,
But
and it's like, God, there's got to be more to it than this type of thing.
right,
And so I get that. I do get that, and I understand that. But I guess for me, the bitterness and angst and anger was more about never mind. I mean, because that comes
right.
through much more in Nirvana's. I'm really pissed off at everything right now. To me, maybe it's the stature of, like, you could be pissed off and kind of mopey about things, which is sort of how I see Radiohead, or you could be pissed off and breaking things, which is sort of how I see Nirvana.
Or
And
Limp Bizkit.
well, ugh.
Yeah, there's a difference. There's the
I'm
Nirvana.
sorry, Fred Durst is an idiot, but
Nirvana was kind of at the end of the punk chapter where you were breaking things, but you were smart enough to know why you were breaking things. And Limp
right.
Bizkit, I think, is a different chapter where you were breaking things because you were too stupid to think of anything else.
Because you were drunk on
No,
Mickey's Big Mouse or something or whatever. But I mean,
you're just one of the Huns that's setting fire to Rome.
in
You're not
England,
really.
they would call them yabos. I think
No.
there's the whiny bitter, and there's the mopey bitter, and I was more of and there's the angry bitter, and I was more of the angry.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of mopey. There's a bit of mopey to me. I could see.
Mopey? I would consider you mopey. I've never seen
No,
you
as a young
mopey.
man, I'm saying not so
Oh,
much now.
young. Oh, you're a young
I would
mopey.
have been prone to a little bit of mopism at that point of my life. Sometimes I wasn't a super angry young man. It wasn't really the negative emotion I most associate with myself. So we usually on this podcast we drink something. What are we
Yes, we
drinking
do.
this time?
You tell me. I mean, you're
Computer.
you're in
It was
charge.
it was a difficult process for me. There's a song called "Climbing Up the Walls," and I had a moment of flirtation with the idea of drinking Harvey Wallbangers, inspired by that. But I looked it up, and there's like a really expensive Italian liqueur that goes into Harvey Wallbangers. So I'm going to save that, I think, for another day when I feel like going out and shopping around New York for whatever. It's Galliano or something. Does that sound
Galliano,
familiar?
yeah.
Galliano,
There's like two drinks that are ever made with that.
Uh-huh.
Harvey Wallbanger, and then one other one. And I guarantee you, anybody listening, go into your local bar
Mm-hmm.
and ask just to look at the bottle of Galliano. everyone will have it. It'll be
It'll
covered
be
in
dust.
dust.
It'll be dust on the top of it.
There'll be an inch missing from the top, and it will be sugar encrusted, and you can't even get the stupid cap off unless you run it under hot water, because that's how long it's been since anybody's drinking. Anyway,
I bet I could find a bar in New York douchey enough that people are drinking Galliano on a regular basis. I feel like,
like I said,
find it anywhere, it'd be
there
here.
are like two drinks. The most common is a Harvey Wallbanger, which is it. Harvey Wallbanger is a screwdriver with Galliano in it as well. So
okay. Well, I thought of that. Like I said, that just seemed like a bit much. We'll try it. Maybe we'll do Harvey Danger as an album, and we can
maybe so. Yeah.
I don't know, but I also thought about. I looked through. Somebody had a listing of pairings for Radiohead songs on a website, and that was kind of interesting. But it was a gin and tonic, and I was thinking, well, who the heck is this guy? Why am I taking his pairings? They weren't great reasoning for why you should drink them. So I thought about it, and I read a story about the composition of the song "Paranoid Android." I think it's track 2 on this album. There's a story where they're out and there's a whole bunch of people doing coke in LA, and some lady falls over and they spilled a drink all over her. And he said that she got up and she looked like she was going to kill somebody. And somehow the look in her eyes inspired him to write some of the songs from this album, including Paranoid Android. I didn't really understand that. But again, that's like, that story doesn't sound that clever, but if he could find inspiration in that moment, great. That's terrific.
Well, so go ahead and say what we're drinking so we can do that, and then I'll add some.
We're just drinking wine. We're just drinking. I've got a big bottle of Sutter Home, and I'm drinking that.
Cheap red wine. You said cheap wine. You said, right?
Yeah, I guess this is a rosé, but whatever. Okay. I figured cheap. What do you got there? Wine in a box.
I've got wine in a box, a small box.
Wow. And not Franzia, because if I get wine in a box, I usually roll with Franzia. But
you said cheap, and so I've got a small solo cup and a small box of wine.
Okay.
I imagine. So they were in a bar in LA, and I can imagine that he was drinking out of a red solo cup box.
It's rare that one can open a container of alcohol, pour it into a solo cup, and have upgraded the classiness of the container.
Yeah, that's true. So they were in a bar in LA, and it's probably, I imagine, it's one of those bars where the rich LA DBs. I know your son listens to this, so I won't say what that means, but you can look up Urban Dictionary, which rich DBs.
God forbid. I really don't want my son crawling through Urban Dictionary. I hope he never
okay, Alex, you don't do that. Everybody else can do it. But so yeah, he spills wine on this woman, on her Gucci jacket and matching handbag. Yeah. And so I think it wasn't the spilling wine on her, and I don't think it was I think it was. Oh, and they all laughed about it, and then they got kicked out of the bar if they were asked to leave because they did this. All right. So I think it was the fact that they spilled wine. She was so mad because they spilled wine on her Gucci jacket and matching handbag. Right.
Right.
And it speaks to, that's what's important in life. Right. It's the matching Gucci handbag and jacket. That's what made her so mad. You ruined my jacket or whatever. My daughter's told me about it, but there's a famous meme of Kim Kardashian in the ocean crying because she lost one of her diamond earrings. And I mean, like bawling her eyes out. And one of her sisters or something is like, there's people in the world starving right now. And she's like just having a fit because of this lost earring. And it speaks to that. Like, that's LA. And that was.
But I almost feel like, what kind of an a-hole would you be if you weren't upset to lose a diamond earring? Like, I feel like that would be the person who would be the real jerk. Would be like,
I think it was her reaction. Her reaction was like, the world is coming to an end type of thing.
Oh yeah, okay, right.
And it stinks, but it happens, and it's not the world's coming to an end. We don't have to stop everything. So I think that's sort of, and I can see that, considering, again, you got to look at it through the eyes of a Gen Xer. When in the 90s, we're all figuring out that, it's all about who has the most money, it's consumerism and all this other crap. And so it was a rejection of those kind of ideals. I think this sort of typified that to them. I'm sorry I spilled wine on you, and I'm not mad that you spilled wine, but you ruined my Gucci. You know what I mean? Type of thing.
Yeah, not to talk badly about Los Angeles, but that'd be the town to find somebody to react that way. Definitely. You don't have to answer this question, but sure. Have you ever been kicked out of a bar? And if so, why?
God, yeah, I have.
Okay. What's this is only an hour-long podcast, so just the most memorable time that you were kicked out of a bar.
Well, I mean, just belligerently drunk and being asked to leave. I mean, that who hasn't been in a fraternity and had that happen to them?
I think my best kicked out of a bar story. When I lived in New Orleans, I went out with a bunch of friends, mixed gender group of friends. We all go
Mhm.
out, and there's this lesbian bar. And we
Mhm.
went in there and we played darts. Everybody was really friendly. We had a great time. So I was like, I had this memory in my mind of it's fun to go to lesbian bars. So I was in DC with a bunch of my friends, and we're walking down 8th Avenue or 8th Street, and somebody's like, "Oh, there's a lesbian bar," and I was like, "Let's go in there." I had a
Oh
great time
God.
the last time I went. So we go in, and we're hanging out. I'm just sitting at the bar. I'm talking to my one friend, and after about 20 minutes, the bartender comes over and she's like, "You need to leave. We can't have you looking at the girls like that and talking to the girls like that." And I was like, I was completely nonplussed. I was
Uh-huh.
just sitting at the bar talking to my buddy.
Uh-huh.
So we leave, and I turn around and I'm looking at my friends, and I realize my one friend has really short hair, wears
Uh-huh.
glasses, and weighs like 300 pounds. And I was like, they thought that he was a lesbian girl that I was talking to at the bar, that I was bothering
You got to be
a
kidding me.
girl, that I was bothering one of the girls that was at the
You
bar.
have got to be kidding me.
And
Oh
I
my
didn't
God.
tell them. I didn't tell my friends until like a couple years later. I told you, remember we were at that bar with that guy? I was like, that's what happened there. Like, because I didn't
Yeah.
say anything to anybody. I wasn't rude at all. Like,
Has he lost weight since then, I hope?
I actually don't keep in touch with that guy so
Oh,
well anymore,
yeah,
so I don't
well.
really know. I wouldn't think so. It was kind of his MO, but
That is pretty funny. But
yeah,
anyway, yeah, that's a good story. It's better than my stories. I just have the old, get drunk and cause
fall on the
problems
floor and
and
get kicked
yeah,
out of the
fall on the
bar. Yeah,
floor.
okay,
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
that
But
happens.
and that's happened before.
I've been vicariously kicked out of a bar. One time, one of my friends I was just singing karaoke and having fun, and we were ejected from the bar because apparently our other friend, this girl, was like hanging on people and causing all
Yeah.
kinds of ruckus. So,
I've had that happen before where we I was at patio, in fact, with
okay,
some
you got
buddies.
kicked out of patio?
Yeah, well, one of our buddies
That's an
got kicked out.
achievement.
Well,
That
one of
is
our
an
buddies,
achievement.
our buddy got kicked out of patio because he was about to fight somebody, and he was being drunk and belligerent, so they kicked him out. So we all had to leave too because
So for those
you
of you
know
who don't live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which I imagine is
everybody.
100% of you,
Yeah,
patio is, I think, hands down the best bar in the whole city. It's in Old Mesilla, and it used to be Billy the Kid's lawyer's office back at the turn of the
right,
century.
right,
The Pat Benatar video "Hit Me with Your Best Shot" was filmed in the back of the
right.
bar. It's a super cool bar. I would think, national level quality cool dive bar in a
Divey as
city that
dive
in
gets.
a
So
city that really doesn't have a lot of great bars. I recommend, if you're ever there, go get dinner at La Posta, maybe get a drink at Double Eagle, and then go over to El Patio, and that'd be a
for
great
sure,
night in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
absolutely.
Anyway,
And
and try not to get kicked out. Exactly.
right,
So maybe we get back to
yeah, let's talk about
album.
the
I guess
album.
we
Yeah,
sort
sure.
of we sort of digressed a little bit.
Veered.
That's what happens when you do shows back to back and you start getting a little tipsy. You wander,
Right,
as
right.
the infamous Enter the Dragon episode has shown many of our listeners. So tell me what you thought. Like, you hadn't really listened to this before.
I hadn't really listened to it
So
before. No, I
favorite
like it.
songs, worst
Okay, so
favorite songs, worst songs. What do you like? What do you like and dislike?
I don't know if there's a worse song. I mean, they're all Paranoid Android is great. I like that it's in different pieces. So it's like a 6.5 minute song with like four different
Uh-huh.
movements, we call it. And it goes. I like that. I like the breaks in it and stuff. Airbag is really cool.
So they
Where
deny it, but I'm
uh
sorry. Like, they deny that this is a prog rock album or that they even
uh
like prog rock.
right.
But Paranoid Android, like you said, is like 6.5 minutes long.
Yeah.
And Tom York himself said it was half Bohemian Rhapsody and half Happiness is a Warm Gun. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a prog rock song. You may
Yeah.
be starting from scratch and reinventing prog rock,
Mhm.
and you don't
Mhm.
like Yes at all, but that's prog rock. You're
Right.
doing there's different time signatures and crazy
Yeah.
stuff going on in that song. This is what happens when rock guys decide to get creative. This
Yeah.
is what they do. And that's what prog rock is.
Sort of
So
is. And if the experience to listening to it like with earbuds or something, where you catch all the little weird
right, it's a better
outlying
experience.
sounds
Yeah,
and stuff. It's totally different. Like you listen to it in your car radio or maybe your home stereo, you don't get all of that, but you listen to it up close and you'll hear and that sort of is prog rock, right? Where they have,
right.
I mean, if you've ever heard, there's a freeform jazz band called Soul Coughing, freeform
Oh yeah,
jazz
sure.
punk
Yeah, I
band.
remember them. Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You listen to them and they sound all crazy. And then you listen to them with earphones and there's like stuff going on way outside of what you would have thought, like in the periphery.
I got to see them at the HF Festival in 1996, I think it was. There was
Yeah,
that was
they're a
just
cool.
that was a
They're
phenomenal grouping of bands. I mean, I saw all kinds of great stuff there. Like I saw
they're
Bush
kind
for
of
the
like the
first time. Like,
prog rock of like punk jazz or something. But
yeah, I
yeah,
remember
so
them.
there's two things that they deny in this album. They say it's not prog rock, and they say it's not a concept album. I think it's both. I think the concept, the tying concept is the statement on kind of society or generation at the time, right? Because
Yeah, it's
all of the
almost like a
songs have that.
concept.
Yeah, that is the concept, right?
It's not Tom. I mean, it's almost like a concept album. It's not Tommy, but it's
Right.
kind of a concept album. There's a theme running through it in a way that a lot of
But I
albums
mean,
wouldn't
how could
have.
Animal Sounds be a concept album and this not be a concept album, right? I mean, or Pet Sounds, I'm sorry. Pet
That
Sounds,
sounds, yeah,
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 Pet
yeah.
Sounds doesn't have like, I mean, Sergeant Pepper's is like it's kind of like obvious concept.
Sergeant
Pet,
Pepper's is more of a concept album
yes,
because there's that framing sequence with the band, with Billy
right,
Shears and whatnot.
right.
So definitely
At the front,
more in the
the front and
definition
the
of
end.
concept.
Yeah, Pet Sounds is concept. This is concept,
I
you
have
know.
Pet Sounds,
So,
Sergeant Pepper, in my notes here. White Album. I mean, that's what this is like.
mhm,
It's it's a band that was doing well. You
mhm,
know, this album before anybody had heard anything was expected to sell millions of copies because Radiohead was very successful at the time.
mhm.
And they did what
Oh,
they did
Brian
what
Wilson.
Brian
Yeah, yeah,
Wilson
yeah,
did, which is they went into the studio and they just did every crazy thing they could think of
yeah.
because they had the power to do it
Right.
and made the studio super unhappy,
Mhm,
revised their estimate from 2 million sold to 500,000.
right.
But but the band was powerful enough that they still were going to release the album thinking
Yeah.
that. And I think it's very similar to those. It's like you have a band that's doing, you know, in it to some extent, like what you said, a little bit indistinguishable from what Oasis was doing.
Mhm,
Guitar rock, alternative music, not a
mhm,
big deal, and took it into and like put it into a different gear with
yeah.
this album. Like just changed everything, like the way the Beatles did, somewhere between Revolver and White Album, maybe with
Mhm,
Sergeant Pepper, I don't know what, but just completely changed what they were doing.
mhm.
And like what Brian Wilson did with Pet Sounds. And I think this is a very similar kind of a project, like just completely changing what they were doing, and ended up selling 7 million copies. By the way,
And I think that's what sort of turned me around was when I read all of when I did read the history of it. I mean, they could have made another album like the Bends or Pablo Honey or something like that, which was made with Britpop type of stuff.
right?
They could have easily done that, but they chose to do this, and so their legacy became artistic, not like sellout. I always tell my kids like something I've been harping on this since they were like each like 2 years old. I always tell them everybody you've ever heard of in history, you've heard of because they did something different than anybody else. And it's true.
Sure.
Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, anybody, they found a different way to do things. And that's what they did. I said,
Yeah.
if you do the same thing that everybody else does, you might do well in life, but nobody will remember who you are. And that's sort
They
of
also when
what
we
we
look
have
under
here.
the hood for these things, that's definitely true. But what I always find is that they're never jumping out of nowhere, like, you know, Athena springing forth fully formed from Zeus's head, the way that
Right.
seems like they are. They're always standing on somebody's shoulders. They're always
Yeah.
inspired by somebody.
Mhm.
I mean, taking it to a new level and doing something completely different with it. But whenever we do these, I'm always looking at, oh, they learned from this guy and they learned
Right.
from this
Right.
guy, you know, and this one was inspired. He
Mhm.
quotes Pet Sounds. He quotes,
Yeah.
you know, he's talking about the Pixies, how the
Yeah.
Pixies, by the way, are hugely influential band that do not get credit. Nirvana was talking about
Nirvana.
being
Yep.
by the
Yeah.
Pixies,
Yep.
like
That's right.
everybody is.
Mhm.
And I mean, I love them, you know, but they were not getting the attention that they deserved
Right.
at the time. In the late 80s, I had never heard of the Pixies, or if I'd heard the name of the band, the Pixies, but I had not listened to their music. That's another thing I was thinking about. It's kind of this give and take between Britain and America.
Mhm.
And it doesn't flow the way you would think it would flow all the time. It's not always the really creative guys in England, and then we learn from it. It's oftentimes Sergeant Pepper was inspired by Pet Sounds, not
That
the other
sounds
way
right.
around.
Yeah.
It was the
For sure.
American guy from California who was doing the creative stuff that
Right.
inspired the Beatles to step their game up.
Right.
And like I said, the Pixies that's an American band.
Yeah.
And they inspired a lot of music going through the 90s. All you British people out there, remember, we're not complete barbarians over here. We
Right.
do occasionally generate something
We're just
worth listening to.
semi barbarians.
Yes,
I'm
exactly.
drinking red wine from a solo plastic cup after all.
Yeah, we are barbarians. I have ice in my wine, so I just,
Oh, even better.
yeah. I
Take
mean, that's just
that.
because I'm drinking out of the same glass that I was drinking champagne from for the last show, so
Right.
it still has ice in it. But
We're just lucky we don't have any French listeners.
we have had French listeners actually.
Mhm.
I should send you sometime the map of all the different countries where we've had listeners from. It's actually
Mhm.
really fun to pay attention to. We've
Mm.
got all the biggest countries in the world, although I don't think we've ever had a download from China. I think that's more because of the Great Wall
Restrictions.
effect.
Yeah,
I don't
probably.
know if it's Paranoid Android. Speaking of toasting the classics and the history of toasting the classics,
Mhm.
did you catch where the inspiration for Paranoid Android is from?
From oh yeah, yeah, from Hitchhiker's Guide. Absolutely.
Hitchhiker's
Yeah,
Guide to the Galaxy.
there
Yeah.
that wasn't the only one. There were a few. Well, OK Computer. The name comes
OK
from,
Computer. Yeah.
yeah,
I was thinking
comes
about
from
it
that too.
when I started looking at the album, I was like, yeah, OK Computer, that sounds like something you'd say on Star Trek. It's just like a
Right.
quote for somebody talking,
Mhm.
but it's directly from the radio play for
Yeah.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Yeah,
apparently. So I thought that was
and
kind
it
of
makes sense. These guys, they made this and they were in their past 25. They're like 27, 26, something like that. And so that
right.
means they remember the radio BBC One from the 70s and the 80s, which is when the Hitchhiker's Guide aired. So that was like perfect. I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. And I was trying to think of
Uh-huh.
like what would we have like in America, what would we have equivalent? It would have to be like some TV show or something because we didn't listen to the radio, something from Magnum PI or something stupid
No, that was something that
like they did.
BBC
But
did, and it's actually really cool, and it's
well, it's
neat
like
that they did that, but we
it's
never had
squarely
that.
British. It's just one of those British
Yeah.
things. I mean, BBC One was I mean, it had a ton of different shows, radio shows that were serialized and turned into
Which
that.
is funny because people would talk about that like it's a dead format, right? Like, who would even listen to a radio show? But that's people listen to
Right.
these podcasts, these like murder
Well,
podcasts and
that's
stuff all
true.
the time.
Yeah, that's
People
true.
love that
That's
stuff.
a very
So
good point. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
there's a
I was gonna say it makes sense because that was a publicly funded radio station. So they
right,
didn't have to
which
worry about the popular and ratings and stuff
exactly,
like
which is
that.
a double-edged sword, right? It's like
Yes, very much.
if you don't have to worry about popular opinion, you can do something really interesting and
Mhm.
creative, but you could also put out something that's just utter garbage because
Crap.
you don't
Yeah,
care whether everybody likes it.
absolutely.
So
Which our
basically it's a
government does
license
on
to
a,
take chances, and when you take
yeah.
chances, sometimes what you do sucks. So well, BBC is a hybrid pop culture thing and government thing
Mhm.
that we just don't do here. PBS is
Yeah.
probably the closest thing to that. PBS puts out some stuff that's pretty cool that you like. Bob Ross that would have never been on TV
Right.
otherwise,
Right.
like, but that is
Yeah.
great. Like I love that, or Bob
Yeah.
Vila and things like that. There was some
Yeah.
stuff on PBS that was pretty
That's
cool
that's a good point. That's a good
that
point.
wouldn't
Okay,
have
you were going to
happened.
say that before I so rudely interrupted you.
Oh, yeah, it's gone. Whatever it was is completely gone. I have no idea.
Another gem is gone, ladies and
Another
gentlemen.
gem dropped
My
into the ocean
apologies.
like one of Kim Kardashian's earrings. I'm
Um,
just not going to cry about it.
I want to talk real quick because we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to talk about Fitter Happier. Is that what it
Bitter,
is?
happier,
Fitter Happier.
more
I love
productive.
that. My kids were so freaked out by it.
Oh, weird.
And
Okay.
they're like, that sounds weird. That sounds scary. I forgot how like the sound of the Apple IIc.
How bad that was?
I don't know. Is it any worse than, I mean, you've heard AI text to voice. Is it really that much worse than that? I mean, I don't know. It was interesting. It was really interesting. I really enjoyed that song. I thought it was cool. So for this song, they fed bits of text that they found. There were slogans from like radio advertisements or just advertisements.
Uh-huh.
There are all these stupid slogans from commercials, and they fed it into it was the Apple II, I think, Apple IIe, Apple IIc, whatever. But the Macintosh
I
computers
think it was
text
actually a later version, but I could be
was it?
wrong.
But it was a Mac or an Apple. They
Yeah,
fed
it
it into
wasn't
their
that.
text to voice converter, and so that's the whole song. It speaks the lyrics: fitter, happier, don't drink, not drinking so much alcohol, arriving to work on time, all this other stuff. It was fantastic. I loved it. It's 2 minutes of just all the junk you see in advertisements and commercials reduced to AI, weird 80s synth AI voice or 90s, I guess, synth AI voice spitting it
That's
out at
funny.
you. It was
That's
really
funny you
cool.
had that reaction. I remember I had this album and I would listen to Karma Police. I love that song.
Yeah,
And I'd
great song.
listen to it, and Fitter Happier would start, and I'd be like, I'd heard Fitter Happier a bunch of times because I
Hmm.
listened to Karma Police over and over again,
Hmm.
and I'd be like, oh, this is the weird one with the robot talking
Right,
after
right.
Karma Police ends. But yeah, it's definitely a departure. They considered having that be the opening to the album.
Right, but it was
I
too
think that
unsettling.
would have been a mistake.
Yeah,
I think that
I
would have been a
think
mistake. I
the
think they
word they
really
used
could
was unsettling, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense because my
yeah,
kids were
unsettling,
definitely
off-putting,
unsettled. They were
something
like,
like that.
ugh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
maybe it was
not the
off-putting.
yeah.
It was definitely not.
From having listened to it, I think you could say this is not a waste. This
No,
is not like
no,
a
for
waste.
sure. No, this is creative, and this is, and again, getting back to sort of the thesis that you put together not too long ago was that they diverged from what they were doing. They could have
Uh-huh.
just hammered a paycheck, as they say, right? They
Right.
could have just gotten paid for doing what they'd already done because
They
it
talked
was
about doing the bends too,
right, and they just couldn't
which
do it.
would
We
have
just
made sense.
they diverged. They went a different direction. They said, what can we do that we like? I thought it was cool because one of my favorite movies of the 90s was William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And so
Oh yeah, yeah.
the song,
Exit
oh,
music for a
exit
film.
music, yeah.
Yeah.
Exit music for a film was written for the very end, the final credits and the final death scene, spoiler alert, for
Right.
Romeo and Juliet. I love that
Yeah.
film. I always thought that was one of the most creative films ever made,
I really liked it a lot.
and they asked that their song not be included on the album. And I have that album. And so when I was
Uh-huh.
reading that, I was like, oh yeah, it's not on that album. And
What was on that? It was like the Cardigans, right?
the
And
Cardigans for it was Love Fool, but there's also like Butthole Surfers has a song on there. I think like Five Finger Death Punch. I mean, there's a lot of really cool
man,
songs on there.
they used to do soundtrack albums back in the day.
Yeah, those were
You
all
could
one-offs written by each band specifically for that movie for a particular part in that movie,
yeah.
and it went so well. It was such a
It was a music video. The film was a music video for Romeo and Juliet. Like if you did Romeo and
yeah,
Juliet as a sequence of like 2 hours worth of music videos back
yeah,
to back, but it
yeah,
really
for sure.
worked. I thought it was super cool. It was very
Yeah,
much a product of the 1990s.
yeah, absolutely.
A 1990s version of Romeo and Juliet in every
Yes,
sense of the word. That was very good. I liked it a lot. I haven't seen it since I saw it in the theater
yeah.
30 years ago, so maybe it sucks.
You should revisit. No, you should revisit it. I
Yeah.
think you'll be impressed. It's a good flick. They wrote that and surprised themselves.
Uh-huh.
They worked with a new producer who was very esoteric. The word I used earlier. He was kind of eccentric,
Hmm.
had a lot of different ways of doing things, and they're like, we're having fun with this. It was a different song, one that they hadn't done before, different
Right.
feel, and they're
Right.
like, okay, if we're going to do an album, let's go back and do that because we had fun doing that. So, what was the surprise? Because we're at that time. So,
Yeah,
did
it
you have a
sounds to me
surprise?
like the surprise for you is going to be kind of redundant because you didn't know anything about it.
Right.
And I mean, did you have anything you wanted to say along the lines of what surprised you about? I mean, it not being crappy, whiny British rock sounds
Yeah,
like
well, my surprise was how big this album was, and I never heard of it. I mean, I
okay.
sort of consider myself a cultural.
Like pop culture from the 1990s, right?
I did. I mean, I was
That's not
embedded in
alien
it.
territory for
Yeah,
you. So
absolutely. I thought I was there, but one of these things was this was I think a lot of the accolades came after the fact. People looked like 3 years later
yeah,
and said that really spoke to the whole generation, and so forth. So a lot of this, I mean, this is included in the Library of Congress, for God's sakes, because of its
right.
importance. It's not just a bunch of critics that have nothing else to do that came up with it. It was, it is considered very important. So
It's definitely it, and I think that's kind of similar to my experience with it, which was that I bought it because I knew the band and I had it and I listened to it a little bit, but it was like I said years later where I started to realize, oh no, this whole thing is really good.
right,
This is
and
not
so
just a couple of songs that I like. This is a
yeah,
whole album.
so I'm reading this, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is one of the most important albums of all times. Why?
Right.
And that was I think that I read it. So what I did is I downloaded it, listened to it, read everything about it, and then I was like, huh. And then I went back and started listening to it again. And then what I tried to do was I tried to say, okay, remove the past 30 years and put myself into 1997. Where was I? What was I thinking? How was I feeling about life? Can I identify with this and can I see it? And I really could. And I could see it at the time. I wish I wasn't so busy that I let this one slip by. I wish I'd listened to this back then. My wife working in a record store was bringing home all the pop crap of the time because that's what they got their demos of, and then they got to take home the demos. So
Sure.
Savage Garden or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Subscribe.
I had their A and B side singles of
Oh yeah.
was it Chicka Cola was one song,
Truly,
and
madly,
then
deeply.
Truly Madly Deeply. I remember getting a
We've
demo of
covered your love for all things Savage and Garden in
yeah,
the past.
Savage and Garden. I do love Savage Gardens.
We do love the
Um,
Savage and the Garden, yeah.
so anyway,
Not the kid from Wonder Years growing tomatoes
right.
outside of his house, but the 1990s band. So,
So I guess it's that time for me to render a decision unto Caesar.
well, wait a minute. I had a surprise.
Oh, yo, you have a surprise.
I
Really?
actually did have a big
Even with
surprise.
all your experience with this.
All my experience of this, although I have to say I hadn't really thought much about the album. Think at some point in my life I stopped looking at liner notes and doing lyrics.
Uh-huh.
So there were a lot of lyrical surprises for me here. Like what was the one song where I was singing it wrong my whole life? It's the one. Well, the one where he's saying he's not saying I'm tired. He's saying something other than I'm tired and subterranean homesick alien.
Yeah.
And now I don't remember what it was, but I have to go look at it again because I've been singing it wrong my whole life. But anyway, the thing that really surprised me was with Karma Police.
Uh-huh.
That's the chord progression from Sexy Sadie off the White Album.
Interesting.
And it didn't really occur to me. I had to go and listen to the song, and it was like, I'll be damned, it really is. It's the same chord progression. It's meant as an homage. It's not like ripping it off, but that really surprised me. They seem like incredibly different songs. The chorus of that song is exactly the same. Yeah, so I mean that's my surprise. It's real, but it's fairly small and trivial. Upon revisiting this for myself, I'm definitely toasting it. I enjoyed it a lot. I had forgotten how good it is from top to bottom. I wasn't really aware what an impact it made. I thought of doing the album for the show because I was at a party and a friend of mine suggested, he was just talking about the great albums of all time, and he mentioned this, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's a pretty good album. I mean, I'll go and listen. Maybe I'll do a show about it. Maybe I'll get to know whether it's good. So I thought it was great. I thought it held up greatly, and very similar to the other two albums we did, Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper. Right. I think it formed a transitional period in an important band's progression. So.
Well, I will toast you as well. I think you sold me on this one. This is one of those rare instances where I'd never really heard of it, never really looked at it. You know, you and I are we're a few years apart, but we have sort of the same zeitgeist growing up. But this is one that I just never really got onto. But I played it for my kids, picked them up from school, threw on, said, check this out. My daughter knew immediately. My daughter's really into music, and so she was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard this is a good album." Played it, she really liked it. Played Fitter Happier for them, and they're like, "Ooh, this is weird." But I said as a concept, I said they did something different here, you know, and you got to think about that. I think the equivalent would be, okay, let's go have Chat GPT, which is going to happen. Somebody very soon is going to make an album with Chat GPT. Mark my words.
Just have it make an album or
make the whole thing. Absolutely, why not? Chat GPT, make me an album in the style or influence of Beatles and Metallica.
Somebody was talking to me the other day about, you know how it's not Chat GPT, it's something similar, but it's an AI where you can put in some suggestions and it'll generate artwork for you.
Yeah.
Right. Based on what it can see all over the internet. And somebody was like, oh, that's so messed up that you can have a computer just take all these influences. And I was thinking about it for a second because my first impulse, of course, was like, oh yeah, it's gross, you know, having a computer replace human art. But then I was like, but that's what the human brain does, right?
That's exactly what the human brain does.
We take in all this stuff through our whole life, and then we spit something back out that's a spin on what
we've seen. The difference is we do something unique though. Like, have you ever seen Picasso's? I think I've talked about this before. Like Picasso,
when he was a young man,
when he was 12 years old, and it was like it was amazing. It was like what a master would do at that time.
Right.
And he won like an art exhibition with it. He always said that when he was a child, he had to learn to paint like an adult, so that when he was an adult, he could learn to paint like a child. And that's what humans do. Chat GPT, I don't think we'll ever get there. Maybe it will.
I think 99% of humans do exactly what the AI does, which is spit out something from whatever they've seen that's slightly different. And then there's a guy like Picasso that comes around once every 100 years. Who does
no, you're right. No, you're absolutely right.
Like,
well, that's the point. No, that's the point right there. Okay, I'm going to bring this back around and we can split. You're right. 99% of the people would have, if they were Radiohead, 99% of them would have just taken the money, put out a different album.
Yeah.
Put out a different album. They would have been Oasis again, right?
Right.
But what makes us human is they diverged. They zagged or zigged or whatever when they should have gone the other way. And they said, you know, I don't feel like that. I feel like doing something different. And they came up with something new. And that's what humans can do. AI can't do that yet. but who knows? I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future? But
Yeah.
our saving grace is that we can decide creativity is more important than a paycheck and do something else. So anyway, for what it's worth.
Right. We can go
So
against our programming.
absolutely. Well, cheers to this one. This is a great pick. Thank you very much.
All right. I'm glad you had fun with it.
So my pick for next time is going to be the cucumber.
The book?
No, just a cucumber. Remember we talked vegetable,
Oh,
mineral.
right.
Yeah,
I thought you
so
were serious. You got me.
cucumber, because you could,
Yeah.
after all, you can do tzatziki. You can do, hollowed out cucumber tub things. You can do pickles. I mean, what
Okay.
can't you do with the cucumber? So
Fair
that'll be
enough.
my next pick.
There's
Join us next time.
there's other things you can do with a cucumber. I don't know if we're going to talk about it. But
Well, we this is a kids show. Well,
that's true. Yeah.
a general show. So join us next time, ladies and gentlemen, for the cucumber on Toasting the Classics.
Not for a couple episodes though, because that's free choice.
Well, that is
So-
true. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe for a bit. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. This is Dave McArthur signing out.
And this is Clint Lanier. Hey, go out and find my book. It's called Ted Mack and America's First Black-Owned Brewery, The Rise and Fall of People's Beer. It's for pre-sale now on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. It's doing pretty well. This is Black History Month when we're recording this. So
nice.
do yourself a favor and find out about the first Black brewery owner in America.
So I thought we were doing a party for I thought we were doing a launch party.
It keeps getting, yes, we are. It keeps getting pushed
Okay.
back. I think when we talked about that, it was like March 3rd. Now it's like May 11th. So I don't know why they keep pushing it back. They haven't told me.
Well, let
the
me know because I
details, but-
actually will come to Las Cruces for that.
Well, we will do that. I mean, this is a big deal for me. So I will let you know. I'll let everybody know. And
Okay.
you are all invited. So, so thanks for joining us yet again.
Okay, peace out.
Bye.
That's it for episode 73 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some cherry coke, maraschino syrup, and rum for our discussion of the S.E. Hinton novel The Outsiders. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know your favorite Radiohead album. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ReactiveNuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.